Hi, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. It's kind of cool having this be virtual. And in honor of Mike Poole, honoring my COVID wardrobe, how could I do anything other than here I am again in my COVID outfit. So we're going to talk about overcoming application inertia, which I think has been a theme kind of woven through several of the talks here this week. I think it's been very exciting. I think we're seeing evidence of people overcoming this. I think this, fits into the theme I started Monday morning, which was that data-centric seems to be inevitable. I'm not going to speak anymore on that. I think we're getting a lot of encouragement to that end, but this elusive bit is this problem that we have with application-centric inertia, and being kind of at the coalface of this stuff. A lot of days, inertia feels like this, Sisyphus pushing the boulder up the hill. And actually, this is not entirely fair. This is inertia plus potential energy, because if Sisyphus stops, the boulder rolls back down on him. Really, inertia is either an object at rest stays at rest, or an object in motion continues in motion. Those are both inertia, and there's we can take advantage of some of those, because the second kind of inertia, that the idea that something in motion will tend to stay in motion, is what makes a flywheel work. A flywheel is a big, heavy wheel that is hard to initially get it moving, but once you do get it moving, it resists being stopped. So a very small addition of energy will keep it going. So a lot of what we want to do is figure out how we can shift our situation from the Sisyphean, rolling of the boulder to, let's get a flywheel going and get a few more people helping us turn it, and then things are gonna be great. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about how to overcome resistance, because we know it's out there, but we also want to do it. We're going to talk a lot about how to not always be pushing. What are some other strategies so that change becomes the new normal? Because that's pretty much where we want to go. We're going to talk a little bit about how companies change, and just, because they do over time, and that's the whole issue. We're trying to get firms to change, but also there's people in the firms, and how individual people approach change is different. Companies don't act as individuals. They act in certain ways. We want to understand that. We want to align with that. And then individuals work in certain ways, and being a little bit aware of that, we can take some advantage there as well. So this diffusion of innovation idea has been around. It was literally popularized in the 30s and 40s, when somebody observed that someone had introduced hybrid corn, and all the farmers didn't just adopt it all at once. 1 year there'd be a few farmers, and the next year a few more. But within a decade or so, hybrid corn was the new normal. And they went back and tried to study. They came up with this. Everyone's seen this cycle in its many forms. But the person who really popularized it was Geoffrey Moore. Whole series of books, but he's the one. Okay, he's the one that introduced the chasm. He says this little bell curve isn't quite as smooth as everyone paints it. Right in there between the visionaries and the pragmatists is a chasm, and you can easily, in fact, many people do fall into this chasm. So we want to talk about both the nature of the chasm and how to get across it, both as an industry and also as a company. And so we got three things going on here. We got an industry, we got a company, and then we got individuals within the company, all three of which have inertia, and they have inertia to more or less stay where they are and do what they're doing. And we, of course, are self-selected early adopters over here on the left, trying to figure out, what is this chasm and how can we cross it, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's, the nature of where we're going. When Jeff Moore wrote this book, I think he was just coming into his venture capitalist days, made this observation that if you look at the way you spend money, you're spending a fair bit of money over there to the left of the chasm, and you have to have a viable product and a few happy customers. And I would say that's where our industry pretty much is right now. We have lots of viable products. We have happy customers. We do not have mainstream adoption. Data-centric is not the new normal right now. And the venture capitalists look at this next adventure, this next segment, as the valley of death. You got to spend a lot of money, even though you already now have a successful product and successful and happy customers. That's not enough. You have to keep spending to get across, and then obviously, as this thing takes off, the money follows, and venture capitalists get rich. Isn't that the end game? Jeffrey Moore made some interesting observations about what was really going on, but the three, I guess, that concern us here. The main one is he has this thing called the tornado. Once you get across the chasm and once you execute what he calls the bowling alley, and we'll just spend a minute or two with that, the market just goes wild. What's bizarre is that suddenly everybody has to have this at the same time, and the winner becomes whoever at that moment in time can deliver the fastest. And as he points out in his books, at that moment in time, and that moment in time, by the way, lasts for a year or two. At that moment in time, customer service doesn't matter, being good at anything, nothing matters other than shipping, getting things installed, getting market share. So it is just wild and crazy. It's growing like crazy. And then it kind of settles out. Once you get on Main Street, any given industry, somebody has 50% of the industry, somebody else has 30, somebody else has 15, and then there's a bunch of everybody else. I mean, then it just settles out and it becomes the new normal. And the bowling alley, I'm not going to spend much time with that, but it's you have to have, as we'll talk about in a minute, a way to get across the chasm. And once you do, that you're knocking down that, they call it knocking down the head pin. Then you want to knock down adjacent markets and adjacent product extensions, and you go both ways. Like the one pin hitting the two, and anyway, that's the analogy. But let's focus on the chasm where we don't want to be. Interestingly, like we said, just having a product that works and having happy customers isn't enough. And you're over there pushing this rock up this hill. In fact, this is where the hill is getting the steepest. We're mixing our metaphors, because that isn't what it is. In order to cross the chasm, you have to have something. You have to have some market, something that everyone wants, not just the immediate customer you have. And I was reminded of this a long time ago. There used to be a software newsletter. I don't even remember the name of it, but it went out to people who were writing application systems, which we were at the time. And it was edited by a guy named Dave. I don't remember his last name, and he had this charming letter to the editor section in the back. It was just Dear Dave. And this one letter, these people wrote in, Dear Dave, my colleagues and I left this other software company and took the software we had been working on with us. Right off the bat, I can't believe they're admitting this in print. But anyway, and they're going on, they're looking for advice, and over the last 3 years, we decided to focus on 3 major market areas. And we were going to divide both our marketing budgets and our development budgets into each of these 3 areas. And the 3 areas were manufacturing, services, and as of course, if you're a taxonomist or ontologist, and you're parsing the sentence and you're thinking, okay, that's pretty much everything. And the third one was locksmiths. he goes on to say, over the last 3 years, we found out that there's 6,500 locksmiths in the U.S. and they have crappy systems, and we're really getting a lot of traction here with locksmiths. And of course, the ontologists among us would realize a locksmith is in the service industry, but that isn't the point. The point is you get incredibly narrowly focused and go own the locksmith market. And that's the kind, and of course, Dave in his letters to the editors deadpans back, I think you're onto something with the locksmiths there. And that's the whole point. You need some addressable market that will get you across the chasm and get you kind of an installed base. And then, you can go to the bowling alley and the tornado and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time. This part of the presentation is for the vendors that are here. I think they recognize that they have to find some niche. Many of them, most of them, I think now have successful products and successful customers. Not very many of them have a market niche that they can use to get across the chasm and expand out. The one other thing I just stumbled across when I was doing the research for this talk, and I just thought it was so fascinating and it's so counterproductive. This company called Octo.com, who I'd never heard of, but I want to give them credit for making this observation, had aligned Jeffrey Moore's crossing the chasm on the bottom here with the Gartner hype cycle. In fact, they also aligned it with Clayton Christensen's ideas, but it wasn't as clear and it took up space on the slide, so I left it out. But look what's going on. Over here in the Gartner hype cycle, back then when we're getting the enthusiasts going, is when Gartner finally gets wind of it and starts saying, oh, this thing's going to be great. And then just as we're getting up to the chasm, it peaks. And I've observed a lot of times the reason that a lot of technologies peak right at that point, I hadn't really made the connection to the chasm, but they're related, is what happens is that a lot of the enthusiasts and the early adopters, especially the internal ones, understand this stuff, or understand whatever it is that's new, not just data-centric, but every fad that's come along, they get it to work. That's what gets other people excited. And it's the hyping of the technology that causes a rush of people who don't know what they're doing to show up, claim to do something, which is exactly when the thing comes down, the trough of disillusionment. Everybody's, oh, this doesn't work. And of course, that's happening at exactly the same time legitimate people are trying to get across the chasm. I mean, you couldn't time this worse. I think they're right. And then, having gotten across, and now we're getting adoption, and it's rolling out, and the tornado, and everybody wants this. Yeah, of course, Gartner would say we're now on the slope of enlightenment, and on you go. Anyway, that's just some observations, some thoughts for the vendors here. I feel your pain, but it's not my pain. The other aspect of the chasm, the chasm also exists in an individual company. So that, what Jeffrey Moore was talking about and what I was talking about up to this point is, mass selling of products into industries or marketplaces. But how about if you're sitting in an individual company? It ends up looking more or less alike. And it says mainstream market, but really we mean, that thing on the right is business as usual in your company. And right now, business as usual is something else. Business as usual is buy a package, rent software as a service, keep doubling down on integration technology because you got so many silos and blah, blah, blah. That is business as usual. And over here on the left are proofs of concepts and pilots and stuff. And there really is a chasm there. We're going to talk a little bit about how to get across that in your company and how to get across that with individuals in your company. The first mechanism that almost everybody uses is called a proof of concept. And we're going to advocate not to go this route. The this one, I've got it trending down and falling out. And I'll tell you from both a couple of clients and a couple of anecdotes I've heard why proofs of concepts fail. And by the way, even that term, NASA kind of pioneered this idea of having a 10 scale thing of incredible imaginary technology. And you had to prove that it could really work and all this. And there's 9 scales and, commercial viability and all this. Everything we're talking about here has already been proven time and time again. And you heard many people here are using this. There's nothing, I don't think, left to prove. But here's the real problem. So we were working with a client, and I forgot how this conversation came up. They were just talking amongst themselves, and one of them says, we've got a problem with these POCs. They were doing so many proofs of concepts, they called them POCs. We got a problem with these POCs, and the problem is this: we go out there and we ask a vendor, do a proof of concept and make the sky purple. They go away for a couple months. And then sure enough, one day you look out and you go, oh my God, the sky is purple. That's incredible. What are we going to do with a purple sky? That's the whole point. They will ask for these things and then they materialize, and then they aren't prepared for, oh yeah, well, what would I do with that? And furthermore, I was talking with somebody else who had just been talking to a vice president who was just retiring from a major bank, who was bragging to some people that in his career, he had sponsored over 200 proof of concepts, none of which were funded. It's possible to do a funded proof of concept and a non-funded one, as if that were a point of pride or something. It's actually kind of sick. You can have a whole career of just enticing vendors to come in and jump through some hoops. And yeah, that was interesting. And, maybe we'll get back to you. Frankly, and I understand for vendors, a proof of concept is a little bit more than a demo, and it's some stage gate on your pipeline and all that kind of stuff. But our observation is it rarely leads to adoption. What we want to do is talk about things that do lead to adoption. What we think, and it may sound like semantics, but one of the things that seems to lead to mainstream adoption more is this idea of having a pilot. Now, what's the difference between a pilot and a proof of concept? It's pretty much the difference between whether you're solving a real business problem that somebody owns and is responsible for, versus solving something that's hypothetical and is just a demo. And in fact, very often one of the differences is, do you have real data, which you almost always do in a pilot? Do you have fake data, which you almost always, or test data, or something that's been sanitized, as you almost always do in a proof of concept? And if the pilot is set up correctly, that the act of executing the pilot, even if it's not for the entire division or an entire, it may be scaled down, but you want it to be real, because if it's real and actual sponsors can see it, they can then connect the dots. When you make something very abstract and you need your imagination to connect that to solving a real business problem, you've just lost 80% of your audience. 80% of your audience will not make that cognitive leap. But if it's their data and their problem, most people can make that cognitive leap. Gee, you did it for 10% of all of our customers. If you do it for 100%, it'll be 10 times better. That's the leap that you have to get people to make. Whoops. And this is, a little bit of pulling, a little bit of pushing. I love Dan Geschwen from Amgen's presentation this morning. He was over here on the left for most of his career pushing this idea, trying to push it across the bridge or the pilot or whatever. But then somebody over on the other side said, oh no, gosh, come over on this side and pull. It's way easier. Plus, now you got two people over there pulling, and you know, that's the whole idea. Whatever side you're on, you're going to need some help on the other side. You need to put together a project that has, you know, somebody technical that can actually do it, but somebody on the sponsorship side that's going to own it and say it was worth doing and keep it going. And then one of the other things you want to start thinking about, and this is where the inertia thing comes in. What happens when you get across the chasm? I mean, Dan said this explicitly this morning. Now we have too much demand, and there's a whole bunch of people who want onto the data fabric who don't deserve and don't belong here. I mean, that's exactly. I mean, we've just recreated Gartner's hype cycle in miniature in one single company, but it's exactly what happens if inside a company, once people perceive that this is working, they all want on without, you know, doing all the hard work, without, you know, like Henny Penny said, you know, who's going to help me grind my wheat and all that kind of stuff. No, nobody wants to help, but they all want to eat it, right? That's what the internal tornado is. And you know, some of what you want to do, you know, Mike Poole talked about this, is build this internal consortium to get ready for what's about to happen, because, you know, you can easily have too much success. The thing can get going too fast, and it just and you know, you could also recreate the downside of the Gartner hype cycle within your company and kind of, you know, create a data-centric winter for a while. So we certainly don't want to do that. So if those comments, both at the industry level and the company level, are meant to be kind of framework sort of things to keep in the back of your mind, that this is what's happening and know where you are. I mean, I think most of us are on whether we're vendors or people inside companies or consultants, we're probably on the left. Most of us are on the left side of that tail trying to figure out how to get across the chasm. Let's do a little bit of tactical advice now for how do you get individuals, because the company has inertia, the industry has inertia, individuals have inertia. I mean, there's inertia all over the place here. And different people will respond to different clues and different ideas about how to move. So one is the shiny new object, if you will. And I hate to compare it to that, but there are people who like novelty, and if you bring them something new, they'll latch onto it because it's new, and gee, everything else failed, and let's try that. And you need to recognize who those people are. They're probably already in the tent. That's, you know, that's not the, I mean, you need a few of those to be the cheerleaders and get things started. But let's talk about where the inertia really is. Now we're back. I've put Sisyphus on the level now, so he doesn't have to worry about the boulder rolling back on him, but it still has a lot of inertia because it's rough, and the ground is rough, and it's heavy and all that kind of stuff. There's something you want to do, which is remove friction. For a lot of people who are trying to do something, one of the interesting things, you know, there's an air hockey table. You know how those things have almost no friction at all. You just touch them and bing, off it goes. I mean, unlike the rock. And one of the reasons I wanted to, you know, you can either push harder, or you can figure out, well, how do I remove friction? Because then a little bit of pushing is really going to go a long way. And or, as we're going to get in the later part of this talk, maybe you just observe something that's already moving. And anything that's already moving has its own inertia. And unless it's moving in exactly the opposite direction that you want it to move, you know, usually in corporations, things move in kind of random directions. But if you can see something moving, just like the little thing in the air hockey, if you nudge it just a little bit, you know, it doesn't take much effort to put it on a different trajectory. And you don't have to supply all the energy. You know, you just have to supply a little bit of direction. So if you can figure out, we're going to have 4 areas where to look for this. But if you can figure that out, then you've got an end to where things are going to go next. And then the last category, there are a lot of people who just don't want to move at all. And you have to convince them that they're on a burning platform. There's a lot of people who will only move when they're on a burning platform. So, and we have to kind of sort out who's who in this thing. As it turns out, a lot of psychologists and sociologists and stuff have done a lot of studying about how individuals respond to change. And most individuals respond to most changes pretty consistently. There's a handful of, like maybe 10% of the population that responds to change differently from situation to situation. But it's kind of surprising how constant a lot of the rest of the population is. That there's a certain percentage, a fairly small percentage, I think it was around 10%, what the psychologists called revolutionists. There are people out there who just like change for change's sake. Most of the population are evolutionists, and another smaller but bigger than revolutionists are what they call reactionaries. And the way each of these responds to change is a revolutionist just prefers change. They like change better than things being the same. Almost any change is better than leaving things the way they were. Evolutionists like things to be the same as they were, but a little bit better. Every month, every year, every day, things should just be a little bit better than they were, but not radically discontinuous. And reactionaries don't like change at all. They would prefer that things not change. Now, you might think this is kind of hopeless, but and I don't have enough time for all of the stories and case studies around this, but it's kind of fantastic how just the way you use language, and I'll drop a few examples here in this next couple of examples, will change how people respond to change. Change how they respond to change. I guess that makes sense. Just a real quick example that I think this will kind of put it into your mind. Madison Avenue knows this intuitively without actually knowing it. They've been doing this forever. They say that something is new and improved tide, which is kind of nonsensical. Is it new or is it improved? It's one or the other. But what's interesting, the revolutionists see new, the evolutionists see improved, and the reactionaries just see that it's a good old original tide. And you can put out messages like that, and each of the other groups won't even hear, what the other message is. So a lot of this is trying to craft, and I'm kind of running up on my time here. I'll try and speed it up a bit. Craft what's going on and how to move. So for most of our groups, you don't have to worry about the revolutionists too much. They're going to come along because this is new. We got to convince them that what they're doing is not viable. So remember Monday, I suggested these are 4 areas that we got to overcome inertia in. In project management, if the environment is already agile, you say, great, let's go with that. In fact, this is exactly the same. That's some of that language. So somebody who doesn't want to change, you just tell them what we're going to do is if you use those words exactly the same and then say something that's completely different, doesn't matter. If they are into waterfall, then you have to start constructing the burning platform. You have to tell them, and have evidence, this is hundreds of millions of dollars and it's going to run over budget, blah, blah, all that kind of stuff. You have to light the burning platform there. That's your job. Over there on the modeling side, if they have a single simple model, okay, great, you're already data-centric, it doesn't matter, and if you're not in a flexible technology, will help you get there, but you're already there, so let's just go. But if not, again, the burning platform is things like every single time you add another attribute to your to your environment, to your datascape, you're putting a tax on the firm, somewhere between $10,000 and $100,000 per element. I mean, I've done the math and can help you guys with that if you need it. Most people, once you tell them a number, they believe it. So, but I do have some math behind it, and this may help. If people are flexible on their architecture, everybody's got tons of architecture and they've just invested a whole bunch of money in something. If that has momentum and is moving and is not wildly off course, just bump it a little bit and say, yeah, if we added a semantic model to whatever you just bought, Denodo or Snowflake or something, I think, you could get there. If they've got the Architecture of the Month Club, this is what you've been doing. And finally, the whole coding world. If they're already model driven, which is highly unlikely, let's help with that. Sadly, I think if you get yourself into and unfortunately, several people this week have said the same thing, and I think it's just an unfortunate observation. If you're dealing with traditional IT that think they have a pretty good handle on this and really like what they're doing, you're going to have to find another sponsor. You're going to get a sponsor outside of IT, I think. Said that a lot of times here. So then in conclusion, there is inertia. I think the part of the thing is just recognize where is it? It exists in the industry. Our industry has not crossed the chasm. It exists inside individual companies. And when you look at an individual company, you have to ask yourself, where am I? Am I promoting proof of concepts that aren't going to go anywhere? Or can we get a pilot? Can I get a sponsor on the other side? Can we drag this thing across? If we do, are we going to have a tornado and is it going to be a problem? Or do we, set up some things like consortia and some norms and things like that so that we can manage the flywheel, because the flywheel is going to get going. And then finally, recognize there are individual people who are gatekeepers and can say yes and no, and they not only do they respond to messages differently, they will telegraph with their own choice of language how they see change, and therefore that should be your clue. You can give the exact same message, string it up with a few different words, and it will land totally differently. So that's my talk. I ran a tiny bit over. I'm sorry. I didn't see a Q&A room, but I think I'll go hijack Q&A room number 3. Let's go to number 3. I know there won't be anybody there. If anybody wants to join me there, I'll be there for a bit. Thank you.